Hello, hello, bonjour, hola, white, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. We'll just let the waterfall of people come in, but because as always we have limited time and fantastic information, I'm just going to dive right in. So my name's Jade. I'm part of the team at the Outdoor Learning Store. We're a North American-wide charitable organisation that offers outdoor learning equipment, tools and resources for educators and learners. And we work really hard with other outdoor educational non-profits. One of those, and our very fantastic partner, is Take Me Outside, and they're our partner in delivering this workshop and a lot of the work we do. So within Turtle Island or North America, we know that land-based learning must honour the traditional knowledge of the Indigenous people who've called this place home for millennia. And so I'm joining you from what's colonially known as the interior of British Columbia or Revelstoke. But for the next people, the people of the bull trout who've called this place home for thousands of years, despite being declared extinct by the Canadian government in the 60s. This is Skihikan. Skihikan means where the ridgelines meet the water, and I'm nestled between the Selkirks and the Monashee Mountains, right where the ridgelines meet the water, and it's a very special place. It's also been hunted, fished, traded, and cared for and stewarded by the Secwepemc, Shuswap Lakes people to the west and east, the Okanagan Silks people to the south, and the Tnaha to the east. The Tnaha call this the Columbia River that I live next to, and this place the land of the Mishkakas, the chickadee, and it is a very special time every time I see one outside of my window. So I ask if you do have this knowledge, if you would share in the chat which Indigenous territory you're joining us from today. If you are living in traditional or unceded territory and don't know whose land you were on, you can visit native-land.ca. It actually covers the entire globe, Indigenous populations from across the world, and it's a really great starting point. So there's a lot of different feelings about land acknowledgements. And for me personally, in my learning journey, they are just the start for relationship building. And it should not be just a checkbox like I've done that and that's that. So I really encourage you to use that as to learn more about who your local First Nations, Indigenous people, First Peoples are, and then reach out and connect. Over to you, Steph.
Thanks, Jade. I'm Steph, and I am the program coordinator for Take Me Outside, and really happy to be here in partnership in this workshop tonight. And I'll keep it brief so we can move on to the main event. But I'm representing Take Me Outside. We have 50 plus other outdoor learning organizational partners that are part of this sort of broad constellation of work that we do. Personally, I'm calling in from Vancouver Island in British Columbia, which is Coast Salish territory. More specifically, I'm on the land of the Kawatsan people, the Cowichan tribes, and the Hulkaminam speaking people more broadly. Haichka, thank you for being here tonight. So learning a little bit of Hulkaminam and also calling in from the shadow of Sukwas, the mountain that is just above me here as the sun setting, and I hope it's just as lovely wherever you're calling in from.
Nim nimt. Thank you, Steph. So, you know, this is a place of partnership, of growth, of caring, of sharing. These workshops are for you and us to learn together. And so we really thank you, whatever time of day it is, whatever kind of day you've had, thank you so much for joining us. And if you're watching the recording, good for you too. This offers us the opportunity to share the incredible work of our partners and our creators, and we hope that everyone feels like they get a little something out of today. We know that this outdoor learning work under that hugely broad umbrella is so about the physical, social, emotional, and academic well-being of young people and anyone connected to them. So we're so grateful that you're investing your time with us this evening. So little quick orientation. Zoom 101, if you have any questions for Aadil or us as a group or an organization, please type them in the chat, and Steph and Duncan are working hard behind the scenes to collate them, and then I'll post them to Aadil at the end of his workshop. You can please stay muted. You can leave your video on. It's nice to present to people. Closed captions should be on your screen. If you want them, you can hit the more button with 3 dots on the bottom right of your screen, and you can either enable or disable them if you have any hearing impairment, and that helps you to understand better. There'll be a quick intro presentation from me just to show you our partners and introduce Aadil. Aadil's workshop, Q&A, and then a couple of prizes at the end, so please stay to the end. There'll be a recording, access to a discount code, and your certificate of attendance will be emailed to you by lunchtime tomorrow, so please check your spam folder if you haven't received it, because it will be there. I'm actually going to just really start with a very quick poll and ask where people are joining us from. So there's some broad North American options there, and then there's, just because you're only allowed max 10 options, we have elsewhere on this beautiful planet. So if anybody is joining us from anywhere else, please share in the chat where, because it won't allow you. Oh, we've got one person, 2% are elsewhere. Please tell us in the chat where you're joining us from. That would be fantastic. Okay, I'm going to let it run for just 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to end the poll. I can share the results with you. And look, we've got a pretty diverse. Nobody from Mexico today. That's a shame. But lots of representation from across. So I'm really excited to see such a diverse audience. And then I had just a quick second question for you, which is kind of, who are you? And you might be multiple of these things, and we haven't enabled multiple choice. I'm very sorry. Oh, Malaysia from somewhere else. We've got someone from Chile, South Korea. Welcome from everyone near and far. And so who are you? Are you a formal educator within the school system at a particular grade? Perhaps you teach all of those. Feel free to write that in the chat and let us know. Are you more of an informal educator or someone working outside of the school system, a parent? We've got some people who aren't outdoor educators, but who are just passionate about it. I'm going to give you 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm ending the poll. I'm going to share some results. So as you can see, we've got pretty much every grade of sort of school-aged children represented. We've got people from every category. So the diversity is fantastic. We are so pleased to have each and every one of you here. Okay, I'm going to share my screen really quickly so we can get into the real good bits. Today is February 21st, and it is Green Ummah and the Great Outdoors today. Just to let you know, these are our international partners that support us in the work we do. These are our US partners. So wherever you are on our website, at our partner site, you can access resources that are relevant to your place. You can access academic resources, you can access activities or practical resources. We hope that we've curated a group of people. Here's our first page of Canadian partners. And our second page. So we are so grateful for everyone who contributes. We are really excited to have a book by Ambreen Tariq, which Aadil might share about, called Fatima's Great Outdoors, which talks a little bit about the outdoors being for everyone. But here to talk about fantastic topics that are really relevant to the way we live and learn in the outdoors is Aadil Nathani, and he's co-founder of Green Ummah. And I'm very excited to welcome you. This is new perspectives of how we can really dive into a lot of this work. I'm sorry, I'm having a bit of a screen share issue here. Okay. Excuse me for a moment. So Aadil is working to bring greener perspectives and actions to Earth's population. Green Ummah is a non-profit organisation with the goal of creating a green movement in the Muslim community. Aadil has responded to the urgent need to address climate change and responsibility that we have to take care of the planet by co-founding Green Ummah, and hopes that it can provide simple, practical solutions for Muslims to be more environmentally friendly. And so over to you. I'm going to share the other slideshow, and we will be away. Welcome, Aadil.
Awesome, thank you. Well, hi everyone, and thank you for joining in today. This is wonderful to see so many faces here, some actually familiar faces as well, which is always nice to see. So today we're just going to talk a little bit about Green Ummah, and we're going to talk. I'm just going to go through a little bit about what we do as an organization and who we are, and one of our very exciting programs, which includes some outdoor learning, and hopefully be able to share some of these resources with you guys. And if we get an opportunity, we might be able to also go through some of our workshop material. I can get to the next slide, please. Thank you. Before I begin, I do want to just start with land acknowledgement. So I am a brown-skinned settler. I grew up on and I currently occupy space as an uninvited guest in the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. Scarborough, which is in Ontario, is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. I acknowledge the seen and unseen privilege that being a settler has provided me throughout my life. Privileges in the healthcare system, in policing, in housing, in employment, education, and all other areas of a colonized society. I also acknowledge that the colonial project continues, and with it, so does the ongoing genocide of the indigenous inhabitants of Turtle Island. And I also humbly acknowledge that I'm still learning, and in order to achieve reconciliation, there must first be truth. So we must all learn about the lands we occupy far and wide all over the planet. I do encourage you all to go to native-land.ca and think deeply about the lands that you occupy, that you reside on, and your role as a settler in those lands, what you've gained from your presence on the lands that you currently occupy. With that, let me just switch up a little bit, and I'm just going to introduce Green Ummah here. So if we can actually switch over to the next slide, please. Thank you. So Green Ummah was a nonprofit created literally around that dining room table on that day at the start of January in 2020. Little did we know a pandemic was about to come our way at that time. But we started as a group of young Muslims who were looking to create just solutions for the environmental problem and make sure that the Muslim community was heard. That's actually perfectly fine to be on that pillar slide as well. And make sure that Muslim voice is heard in the environmental space here in Canada specifically, but also empower Muslims around the world as well to act on the environment. So what do we work on? And we can flip to the pillar slide here. We work in three different spaces right now. So we work on research. So we're actually implementing a high-level research team that is going to be creating and churning out material for the community to connect with that talks about things like sustainability in Islam, climate change in Islam, racism, justice, the environment, and Islam. So really kind of making these connections for the Muslim community, most likely for the first time ever. We work on community engagement. So in this bracket here, we have things like our Ramadan campaigns, which we run yearly, which are educational and engaging campaigns for the community during the month of fasting, which is really an introspective time for Muslim people throughout the world, where we think about our own habits and we encourage more sustainable actions and habits to be built during that time. We do a little bit of advocacy work with federal, provincial, and municipal governments. We do speaking engagements like this one, and then we have our big project, which is the Greening Our Communities Toolkit, which is our education project, and I'm going to get a little more into that in a second. And we also have our innovation wing, which is for young students in the high school or university level to come and build projects, environmentally friendly projects through us. And we can flip on to the next slide here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Greening Our Communities Toolkit. So this toolkit is two packages. Package one is what does it mean to be green and what does Islam say about the environment? And package two looks at what impacts how I think about the environment and how we can build an inclusive green movement. Now, these are fully created packages ready to teach that are provided to teachers with everything from teaching materials, activities, rubrics, curriculum connections. So we actually have them meeting certain specific connections in the Ontario and soon to be Alberta curriculums here in Canada. So they're able to be taught as part of the school year and not outside of that. These curriculums and these packages are asset-based, so we try to meet students where they're at, and they're taught between a grade 7 to grade 12 level right now. So that is between the ages of 13 and 18 right now. And we've met the curriculum connections for each of those. These curriculums are solutions based because we find that students, especially in that age range, kids especially in that age range, are doom scrolling so often and surrounded by so much doom and gloom that we really want them to think outside of the box and think of themselves as change makers and solution creators. So we've made them heavily activity-based and solutions-based in terms of the packages. So for instance,
13 to 18, great.
So sorry, I think someone just got unmuted there. And the other two things that we've really worked on throughout the two packages are to make them justice-based and really ensure that we kind of encapsulate different worldviews and different ideas of the environment and of justice and everything that we're doing, and to make them nature-based. And this is where the Outdoor Learning Store comes in, and we've been working with them, working as partners with them, because we do encourage our students to take some of the curriculum outside. So for the first time ever, a lot of this is being taught outside in the York Region District School Board and in other school boards throughout the province of Ontario. Right now, we have about 21 schools teaching our materials for this semester until June. So why did we decide to go outside with this? I think it's really important to know that there is a connection to be made between two things. One is a lot of the students that we're teaching to, they are either newcomer Canadians, racialized Canadians, or come from marginalized groups who may not always see themselves in outdoor spaces and who may see outdoor spaces differently. All of that is a barrier to going into outdoor spaces. And so we've really tried to make sure we get students outside. We've got into a partnership with Nature Canada, and we take students right into national wildlife areas or migratory bird sanctuaries. That there is actually a picture in Leamington, Ontario, which is the southernmost part of Canada. And we had some students go there from Windsor last year to Point Pelee National Park, where they got to see some different, do some unique activities. And for a lot of them, it was their first time entering nature. So we're really happy that we're able to remove those barriers for the students by providing them with a free trip and getting them outside. The second reason we really focus on getting people outside is because we believe that to really kind of change the attitude towards the environment, students need a connection to nature. A lot of people are not connected to nature, especially those who live in urban areas, to the point where you don't even notice the localized nature as you're walking home from school or going to school or going to the grocery store. But because we take them outside, not just to national wildlife areas, but also into localized nature spaces, we found that our students are now appreciating nature a lot more and have said, according to our stats at least, that they're more inclined to act on the environment and feel more of a connection to the environment and environmental issues. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do here is just go through some of our workshop elements that we teach. Of course, these are taught at a with much more thought, care, and time in the classroom, because some of these concepts are really, really hard for students to dissect, especially as it's the first time they're often actually engaging with these. But from the Worldviews and Justice workshop, we have a few activities, and I might just run through them here. And I would really appreciate if we can also get a little bit of participation. So feel free to use the chat box and and or even popcorn style at some point might be good, but we might just do number 1 and number 2 here, just all together, just so we can also see where we're all at in terms of these concepts. Next slide, please. So let's start with what a worldview is. And what I'm going to do is ask everyone to maybe just take 60 seconds here with an eye on the time as well. So we'll take about a minute here, and I want you all to just think about what a worldview is, and if you can, pop something into the chat box as you're thinking. Really good answers here.
And I do apologize ever if the slide changing is very, very, very sensitive, the screen, and I'm doing lots of chatting with people and moving things. So very sorry, but just wanted to let you know. No
worries. It's really fascinating here because we're kind of touching on so many different aspects of worldviews in this chat here. So I'm gonna just ask that we, as people are still going into this here. Perhaps we can just flip to the next slide here. Thank you. So this is a little bit of Green Ummah's definition of a worldview that we share with our students. What we say is a worldview can come from religion, ethics, culture. It's a philosophy of life or a conception of the world. A worldview influences everything in your life. So for an example, for me as a Muslim, I apply the Islamic worldview to my life. So I think about things through what I've been taught is right or wrong through the lens of Islam. A worldview, though, is essentially how you see the world around you, how you interpret what happens, what you find important, what you value, what you don't value, what assumptions you bring in, and how you think of solutions. So exactly what you see here on the screen. And what's really important here is that we have students really starting to connect with worldviews and values. And so if we actually flip over to the next slide here, we'll do a little bit of a values exercise that kind of goes hand in hand with worldviews. So I want you all to think about, let's say we'll do another minute here, and maybe we can think about one value that's close to you, and if you can kind of break it down and think about why it's important to you. Oh, there's the finicky slide again. And if you're at all comfortable, please go ahead and share in the chat box as well. I'll give an example as well, just so we can get our juices flowing here. But for me, I value helping others, and it's something that I think I got from my parents. It was something I saw them always doing as I was growing up as a little kid. So my value is being communal and helping folks, and who caused me to hold this value was my parents. And it's really fascinating as we see students kind of think about how they get their values and what they hold really closely. We've seen examples of students talk about spending time in nature or treating people and things with kindness. Oh, there we go. Waleed just said that as well. And can you guys think about where you might have got these values as well? What we're really trying to do is break down for students how they're thinking about how they're getting to what they're thinking about, and how they get to what they hold dear to their hearts. And it can be anything related to the environment, not related to the environment. But these are really oftentimes the first time a student is asked to really think about these things Fascinating answers in the chat box. Thank you all for sharing. I know it is, and I know I've put you all on the spot here a little bit, and these are personal questions, but I do appreciate the answers we're getting. And so it's very interesting because what we're looking at here and the way we explain everything to students as well is that what you're really analyzing right now, food. Sorry, that distracted me. That is a wonderful, wonderful answer. What you're thinking about right now is your own personal worldviews, your own personal values, the things that you hold near and dear to yourself in your heart, and you run your life through these principles and these values. But then you also have societal and cultural worldviews, and this is where we drive the students to start to think outside of the box, outside of what they might be used to thinking, and importantly, I think outside of the colonial and capitalist mindset. And so what we encourage students to do, and teachers walk them through this whole process with much more time and care, is start to think about indigenous worldviews as well. And with this, we can flip to the next slide.
And social structure. Worldview is also how we think about our relationship between ourselves and other living things. You have a worldview that shaped you and has determined your beliefs. In the same way, Indigenous people have a unique worldview that influences absolutely everything we do. By learning about Indigenous culture, traditions, practices, and teachings, you are engaging with an Indigenous worldview. So let's talk more about that. The second thing you need to know about Indigenous worldview is the fundamentals of this worldview. Now, what is an Indigenous worldview? The guiding principle of an Indigenous worldview is that all living things are connected. Appreciation for all living things is a prominent Indigenous value which comes directly from the Indigenous worldview. Indigenous people live their lives under the principle that all living things contribute to the circle of life equally and should be acknowledged and respected as such. Indigenous people believe that the connection to ourselves, to the Creator, to Mother Earth, and all living things are integral parts of existing. That is why the land and other natural life is so important to an Indigenous worldview. Understanding that all living things are connected and that everything plays an important role in the world is an integral element of an Indigenous worldview. These principles are what guide the teachings, beliefs, values, and practices of Indigenous communities. Now, the third thing you need to know about Indigenous worldview is how it differs from Western worldview. Now, how is Indigenous worldview different from Western?
Thank you. So we do then walk students through these very important concepts of Indigenous worldviews, their own personal cultural worldviews, and Western worldviews. Importantly, while we actually usually do our Indigenous worldviews, we typically like to do this part of the program outside, so students really can see, feel, and be in nature as they're thinking about the way that Indigenous people connect to connect everything back to nature, and it has shown to have had a profound impact on many of our students so far in the past 2 years. Now, before we get into how the Indigenous worldview, before the video gets into how the Indigenous worldview differs from other worldviews, would I be able to take another minute and ask some folks to maybe put some ideas into the chat box as to how they believe Indigenous worldviews differ from Western worldviews, and or how your own cultural worldview differs from the Western worldview? Time and money is an interesting answer there. I smell capitalism in the air. Thank you, thank you guys for that answer as well. I think it's important to think about this as well from the perspective of our students as well. And we had one student last year who in this part of the session answered with a brilliant answer, and I'm going to read it out to you folks. So our student, it was a grade 9 student last year, said Indigenous people and other people were able to live in cooperative, respectful relationships with the environment until around 400 years ago, when we started seeing the planet as a resource, destroying our nature and polluting our water. For most of human history, humans have lived with nature and animals. And I think that was really profound and unexpected for me to have a grade 9 student who had never engaged with elements of colonialism and capitalism, really because it's not taught in schools, be able to decipher that and come to such a deep and intrinsic answer. And we can flip to the next slide here as well.
And social structure. Worldview is also how we think about.
And so, yes,
That's the correct slide.
that is the correct slide here. So, and I think it also it goes off of where our student where our student reached as well. Essentially, was engaging in reciprocal relationships with the environment. And you know, in these points, then we talk about where people have come from before they got to Turtle Island, and how their ancestors often lived with the environment, and how that relationship with the environment has changed. So I would also encourage you all to think about that deeply yourselves as well, to think about how within your own family and your own your if you trace your own roots back, maybe even just a generation or two generations up, maybe I can even just see some answers in the poll here, but how far up are you from, or how far down are you from folks who were literally living and surviving off of the land in terms of farming or something like that? Because for me, it's one generation removed. I have a family who are farmers back in Kenya as well, where I come from. Yeah, that's absolutely incredible that we're all just ever so slightly removed here. Even great grandparents not removed at all, really. When you try to take in the wider principles, and you look at things like the 7 generations principle, and how we were taught, or how we should be taught through indigenous teachings and principles, that we should be looking 7 generations ahead for everything that we're doing, to see how it's going to impact folks 7 generations down the line. And here we are, one generation removed from people living on the land, for many of us, as I'm seeing in the chat. And we've almost lost that principle of connecting to the land, cooperating with the land, having a respectful relationship with the land, sustaining the land. And it's more of a cultural shift as well. And I think when our students were able to really sit down and think about this, many of them, again, newcomer Canadians, it really kind of resonates and takes and they're able to take stock of things. It's another 0 as well. So it's great to see, and I hope that folks here are still also finding ways. I saw some people say that you're still trying to grow your own produce, and I hope folks are trying to do so. So I'm just gonna take a step back here now out of indigenous worldviews. This was a very out of worldviews. This was a very rushed kind of the example of something that one of our workshops and or curriculum could look like. Jade, could you give me an idea on time here? I think we wanted about a 20-minute Q&A, right?
Yes, I think if you did another 10, 12 minutes, then would be great.
Okay, fantastic. Let's jump into another very difficult topic then and try to cover it very quickly, but let's jump into environmental racism. So again, I'm going to ask you all to take a minute here and think about it and think about what environmental racism could mean to you, and please pop it into the chat box. Interesting. Tanya, I saw your answer there. And yes, globally it is part of it as well, but we're gonna stick to the local environmental racism. And Lily and I, good to see you back at this workshop as well. I'm sorry you have to go through this one more time. Lillian's also going to be one of our teachers coming up soon, I believe. So I'm really excited to see that. So if we can get to I believe the next slide here. Awesome. So we'll go through what is environmental racism, and the way Green Ummah defines environmental racism is the way in which minority groups, if you look at Canada, it would be the way in which minority group neighborhoods in Canada populated primarily by Indigenous, Black, or people of color and members of low socioeconomic groups are burdened with a disproportionate number of hazards, including toxic waste facilities, garbage dumps, and other sources of environmental pollution and foul odors that lower the quality of life. All around the globe, members of minority groups often bear a greater burden of the health problems that result from higher exposure to waste and pollution. Not to mention, people of color globally are also facing the brunt of poor climate action and pollution from the West. And another form of environmental racism is actually lack of access to outdoor and nature spaces, or barriers put up that lead to the lack of access to outdoor and nature spaces, or make people of color feel unwelcome and unsafe in outdoor and nature spaces. So to really break it down, I think you have to think about the fact that we have a lot of environmental hazards in neighborhoods. So you have garbage dumps, factories, gas and chemical plants, and all of this happens through land use planning. You have neighborhoods where people can't access water, where people can't access nature, where people don't even have trees built. All of this is examples of environmental racism, and a lot of it comes out of our land use planning and municipal law principles. Also a bit biased here as a municipal lawyer. And so all of this not only impacts your physical health, but also your mental health and your quality of life. Happens not only in Canada, but all over the world. And as I said, you see the disproportionate impact of poor climate action in other parts of the world. We saw this happen in Pakistan, when who's responsible for less than 1% of the world's GHG emissions. Yet 1/3 of the country was underwater just last year, and they didn't get the help that they needed from the global community. You saw this when Afghanistan flooded. We've seen this with droughts in Africa and pollution from mining companies in Africa and South America. We see it when, as the Amazon rainforest is being depleted and destroyed. We see it with glaciers melting in South America and Asia and North America. It's all interconnected. We really have to start seeing the planet as an interconnected species and seeing who's kind of left out of the impacts, the more disproportionate impacts of climate change, of the warming of the planet. And we have to start to see that the people who have the least resources, even locally, they're the ones who are not causing the problem, but they're often the ones left to deal with it. Now, what we're also seeing is we're seeing people who have to migrate, they have to leave their countries, leave the areas that they were born, that they know, just because of the climate. There's no safeguards built in for them. There's no space for them within the UN Refugee Convention definition of a refugee. So they have nowhere to go. So you have climate refugees as well. Cutting down trees and not planting for the future, another very important one. But it's very sad as we're seeing, and oftentimes parts of, and I hate using this, but parts of the global south being impacted more. And this is where our students also, I think, are able to connect with these places, because a lot of them do come as newcomer Canadians and racialized Canadians from these places. They have families in these places, and they're able to see and hear about the disproportionate impact. I mean, we've seen it all over the world right now. The places that are hot are getting hotter. Places like Toronto, where we should be having snow and be covered in snow right now, have no snow at all. We see the impacts. The impacts of climate change are here, but they are impacting us all differently. And on local environmental racism, I'll tell you guys a little story, because it's really important that we start to see this everywhere. I'm going to ask that we flip to the next slide here, Jade, but I'm going to ask that we don't play the video as of yet, because I'm just going to talk a little bit about Chemical Valley if I can. Chemical Valley has been home to the Chippewa people for over 300 years. It's been a hunting ground and a land of the First Nations people, and the British government took it from them in 1827. This is nestled in between what is now Canada and the United States, in Ontario, in Sarnia, right at the border. And over the years, this land's been overtaken by plants and refineries that have polluted the air. It's the most poisonous location in North America. And 40% of Canada's chemical industry right now is actually 60 chemical plants and oil refineries in just 24 kilometers around Chemical Valley. We can perhaps share this video with you folks afterwards as well, but there's a lot online about Chemical Valley. So I want you guys all to really just think about the next thing I'm about to say here. In 2005, they had a record high 46 days of smog, during which time schools were canceled because of the dangerously high concentration of pollutants in the air. Now, I want everyone to just think, especially those who are here somewhere on Turtle Island, has your school ever been canceled because of a smog advisory? And keep in mind that with Sarnia, there are indigenous reserves all around that, the main part of the town. And actually, if you were to see a map of Sarnia, right around the reserves is where a lot of the refineries are. 46 days in 2005, they couldn't go to school. In 2005, they wouldn't call off school for the craziest snowstorms in Toronto. I've never had a school canceled because of inclement weather even. And we used to get some bad snow. So I think our students were actually really able to sit with that and think about that fact. But due to the plants and the refineries in the air, the surrounding area is actually so polluted that they're having negative impacts on their health, including higher rates of cancer than the rest of North America. And here we really have to break down that pollution is a form of systemic violence. It might be out of sight and out of mind from us and from most of our lives, but it's a part of everyday lives for the people in the communities where it leaves an everlasting and generational impact. And we have to keep in mind that our governments and our policies, from the municipal level to the provincial level or the state level, if you're in the United States, Ontario Island, to the national level, do allow for these sorts of factories to open in specific spaces and not in others. And what is really insidious here is the use of indigenous land for the chemical industry, and it's forcing more and more indigenous people to relocate and creating smaller and smaller reserves just to clear the area for these factories. We've seen it happen in Chemical Valley. We've seen it happen in other parts of Canada. It's a structural poverty producing system, and it goes against all reconciliation efforts. And so really, really, yes, also damaging the water. A wonderful movie available on Netflix as well is There's Something in the Water, and it talks about pollution in Nova Scotia that the Black and Indigenous communities face. And again, free resource available on Netflix right now. I'll just type it into the chat box here, but this is probably Canada's premier scholar on environmental racism. Dr. Ingrid Waldron has produced this, and I would recommend for everyone to take some time out of your day and watch it. It is a tough watch, but it is a mandatory watch. And I do want to also emphasize that the problems that have been caused will exist because long-term health effects will be there. There's, just out of Chemical Valley, there's higher rates of asthma, higher rates of cancer. Cancers like leukemia, there's skewed birth rates. So there's actually 2-to-1 ratio of girls being born to boys within those Indigenous communities there. And so, what we then encourage students to do after going through some of this stuff is we ask them to think about whether they've ever seen an oil or chemical plant, or even a nuclear plant, which is scary sometimes. And think about what they would do if that was in their neighborhoods. And if not that, then I want them to think about if they've seen environmental racism and where they might have seen environmental racism. And so I'm going to let you guys take a minute and think about it and maybe pop something into the chat box if you have. And while you do that, I'll maybe give an example of my own as well. So in Scarborough, which is the east end of Toronto, which is where I'm from, we have a mosque, one of Toronto's oldest mosques, Islamic Foundation of Toronto. And after it was built in the late 70s, early 80s, the property next door was actually zoned to be a garbage dump. So every single day as you're walking to the mosque, and now the entire community behind the mosque is also predominantly newcomer and Muslim Canadians. They smell garbage and they live with the garbage in the middle of the city. And for people coming to the mosque, you're smelling the garbage and walking through the garbage wafting in the air every single day. And these are forms of environmental racism. Another example is Africville, yes, and I do recommend. I do highly encourage people to read about Africville online and how an entire community, an entire Black community in Canada was basically kicked out and extinct, and is now extinct because of the environmental racism and pollution that they faced. The name of the mosque, Shannon, is Islamic Foundation of Toronto. I'll type it in the chat box. You probably won't see an article about this, but if you were to pull up Google Maps and go on Street View, you'll see next door the garbage dump right next door. So we'll just flip to the next slide here, and I'm going to wrap up very, very quickly. But I do want to take a quick moment to go to a lighter subject here and talk about Ambreen Tariq's book, which I actually picked up as well, and I think it was a wonderful resource, especially for you teachers in the younger teaching the younger age groups. It's a children's book about newcomers' first time camping and entering into a national park. And in a way, it actually highlights the importance of the work that we do at Green Ummah as well. In the book, you see the excitement of a little girl as she pulls up to the national park, which I kind of translated and took to be the excitement of breaking down that barrier to accessing nature, that barrier being broken. Another barrier that I saw being broken in this was as she was building the campfire and the struggle that her family went through to build a campfire. And I think back to my own life, and yeah, I had never built a camp. I had never built a fire until my 20s. So it would have been important. It would be important for students, Muslim students, racialized students, to see that their families can do this and encourage their families to do it as well. But at the same time, the family experienced nature in a different and unique way that intersected with their own culture in terms of the food they ate and the songs that they were singing and things like that. So it really showed kind of a nature for all, a nature for all kind of attitude about it. So I think it's really important for young students to be able to see themselves in nature, and I think this book is a wonderful, wonderful resource for them to be able to do so. And I'll just ask you to flip to the last slide here. Thank you. And so this all here was a very, very, very rushed teaser. I do encourage you guys to get in touch with us. Our info email is there. Heba Fahmy is our Director of Education. I'm our Director of Partnerships and Director of Operations. We've been working on the curriculum now for 2.5 years almost, through production and piloting and so on. And our website is about to go through a massive, massive revamp. So very, very soon, actually, the two packages will be fully available online on the website. We're hoping to get that up in the next 2 or 3 weeks. We're just running into a little bit of a problem with our website developer, who's a little under the weather. But these are free resources. We want you guys to use them as teachers. They're being taught through grade 7 to grade 12 right now. Karen, very excited to work with you as well in the coming weeks. But please do reach out to us. We're happy to work with you. We're happy to even set up field trips for you guys and get your students into nature. I'll answer this very quickly here, Melissa. I think there's not really a belief or cultural expectation that would keep people from going outside, Muslim people from going outside, but I think there's a different way that everyone wants to experience nature. And there's actually been some great work done. Jade, I'm not sure if you have the link or not, but some great work done by Ambika Tenetti and Jacqueline Scott about some of those barriers to accessing nature that come from culture. And this was some work done and commissioned by Nature Canada. And it's just that a lot of people see nature in a different way, and the way that we have people see nature in Canada is not always the way, and oftentimes in the United States as well, is not always the way that people from overseas, people coming into Canada, will be seeing nature and will want to engage with nature. So it's important that we broaden the scope and allow more people to engage with nature in a meaningful way. I do sincerely hope that you all check us out and shoot us an email. Teachers, really, really excited to work with you. If you're not a teacher, we also run workshops, so really excited to work with you on workshops as well. And the last thing I will ask you to do is, if you're on your phone right now, please open up your Instagram or your Twitter or your Facebook and type in Green Ummah and shoot us a follow. Jade, is it okay if I just answer some of these questions here?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, by the way. That was exceptional. And I put the link to Race and Nature in the City, which is this amazing report. And then they've created a toolkit as well. That's Jacqueline Scott and Ambreen Tariq. And sneak previews, just for you, it's a secret, but they're going to be talking about that in our spring workshop series, which we're just about to launch after this winter workshop series. So you can hear them talk about it directly. But it is a really amazing way. If you're into the questions and don't need me to pose them, you go ahead and answer what feels right. And I've got a list, and we can go there if you.
Cool. I just see Megan's question here, so I'll answer that one, and then we'll go through the list. I'll let you take over the asking. But in terms of how Muslims view nature, so there is an understanding that within the Islamic principles that we've been put on the planet as a Khalifa or a steward of the land. And that means that we're supposed to treat the land with respect and protect everything that is on the land. Unfortunately, we haven't done nearly enough. And what I actually take that to be through my Islamic principles and teachings is a very deep burden and responsibility, because when you think about taking care of all of the living creatures on this planet, from those in our seas and oceans to those to our fauna, to our other living species, it's a massive burden on us to make sure that we maintain the synergy that has been created. Essentially, there's another wonderful book, and it's I'm blanking on the name right now, but our Islam in the our first package actually kind of runs through parts of this book, and it talks about the 6 principles of Islamic living, Islam and the environment, and it kind of discusses things like balance and stewardship. I'm blanking on some of it just because I see so much coming in here. But I'm happy to also connect with you. Green Deen, thank you, Nadia. Green Deen by Ibrahim Abdul Mateen, who lives just outside of New York. And I would highly recommend folks to check out that book as well. I think it really does not only provide you with an Islamic perspective, but also things that you can take away in terms of how you engage with the environment and with climate change as well. Thank you, Jade, for posting that. And I'll let you jump into the next question here. Also, sorry, I'll add one more thing. Is and it's one of the activities that we do with the students is in Islam we're encouraged to look at what we call the ayat, or the signs of God, everywhere. So we actually take our students outside and have them sit down and look up and just kind of look at what we call the signs of God as they're scaling from the sky to the ground, and kind of really understand how everything's interconnected and everything has a space and a function and something to do. So yeah, a very holistic view of the environment, and I think in ways very similar to other spiritual beliefs, including indigenous perspectives on the environment. We've done a lot of work with bridging the two in terms of indigenous and Islamic perspectives. I actually have a workshop or a conference that we ran on it, and I'll post that as well. Next question.
That's amazing. Thank you. I actually don't see any more because you were so on answering them as they came in. And as we're 2 minutes to the hour and I really want to respect people's times, what I might do is do a soft close where I quickly mention the workshops that we have left in the series. So for example, People's Curriculum for the Earth, Tuesday, Feb 28th, with Tim Swinehart talking about different perspectives again. School Gardening, Teaching Tools and Resources is the last in the winter series. That's Tuesday, March 7th, with Casey Ray, Christopher and Megan Zenny. Of course, we are going to launch the spring workshop series, so you won't be without us for too long. And now I'd love to give prizes. As usual, we have 4 prizes. And just to let you know, we're going to come back if you do have any more questions or you wanted to unmute and ask a question. We'll just do the really quick quiz, and then Aadil said he'd stick around for maybe 10 minutes or so to answer any more you have. So if you do have extra moments and some questions, please stick around. But that was a really fantastic opportunity to dive in, and I'm really excited when people I'm so grateful when people are vulnerable, when you ask a question like, what does this mean, and people say, I don't know. And I think as educators, all of us here as humans, being able to say I don't know and have conversations with people who are working on this is just a magical space. So thank you for inhabiting that space with us today. I'm so grateful. It's so wonderful. Okay, quizzes. Okay, I didn't want to make this a quiz about environmental racism or Islam or things that perhaps I'm not an expert in, whatever. So I did a quiz on the things we use. So a lot of your presentation was talking about our impacts, the relationship we have. And so my quiz is about things that we use in the world. I have two $25 gift cards to the outdoor learning store. And then Steph has got two $25 gift cards to the Take Me Outside store, who have really beautiful ethical made apparel. And so it's a typing quiz. So get your quiz fingers at the ready. And it's multiple choice. So if we're talking about resources and the fact that, you know, we shifted into this economy where we sort of take resources, question 1 is, on average, and there's 4 answers, so wait for the answers. How many aluminum soda cans are used in the United States each year? This is where I could get data. So how many aluminum soda cans? A, 90 million, B, 80 billion with a B, C, 120 million, or D, 3 billion? A, 90 million, B, 80 billion, C, 120 million, or D, 3 billion? Now, somebody got in there real quick, didn't they, Steph?
They sure did, yeah.
Is that Heidi Colburn?
So Heidi was correct. The answer is 80 billion with a B.
80 billion aluminum soda cans. And of course, you know, so we use over 80 billion every year, and while they're recyclable and can be made into a variety of different products, and there's no limit to the amount of times it can be recycled. So there, you know, there are sort of worse resources to use in the planet. But yes, please send your email to Steph in a private message, and whether you're in the US or Canada, so we can make sure we get you the right number of gift cards. Okay, question 2. 4 questions, 4 options again. How much does the average North American consume in paper, wood, or other products made from trees each year? Is it A, 1 tree, B, 5 trees, C, 7 trees, or D, 15 trees? How many trees does the average North American consume each year?
And the right answer is C, 7 trees. And so Marina Giovanoli was right in on that one.
Okay, congratulations. I find that sort of just, yeah, quite incredible, really. So in the US, that's about 2 billion trees a year. And so for me, that's a huge thing. I live in a forested area, and where I grew up didn't have any trees left because we'd cut them all down. So sustainable forestry is a big thing. Okay, question 3. Now we're on to Take Me Outside gift cards. Here we go. The question, again, multiple choice. A typical glass bottle would take how many years or more to decompose? A, 20, B, 150, C, 4,000, or D, never? How many years does it take a typical glass bottle to break down? A, 20, B, 150, C, 4,000, or D, never?
Yeah, so the answer is C, 4,000. And it looks like Tanya Pinkney was first with answer C, 4,000 years.
Thanks so much for participating. That blows my mind. And it's even longer than that if it's actually in a landfill as opposed to at the surface, which is obviously where most of our waste ends up if we are really thoughtful about recycling. Okay, last question for you. What percentage of monetary purchasing goes to packaging materials, right? So I feel like food used to just be loose. But what percentage of monetary purchasing goes to packaging materials? These are sort of slightly long answers. A, is it $1 for every $10 spent is on packaging? Is it B, $1 for every 50 cents that you spend? Is it C, $1 for every $100 that you spend? Or D, $1 for every $1,000? So is it 1 for 10, 1 for half, 1 for 100, or 1 for 1,000?
So Carrie Martin said A, which is the correct answer, the first one to write that one. Good job, Carrie. So the answer was $1 for every $10 spent.
Yeah, so we're just paying for packaging, and packaging accounts for about 1/3 of our waste by weight, or half of our waste by volume, when we look at what's going into landfills. So it's just something to think about. So much of what you shared, Aadil, and about these concepts, and what I love when I learn new things or I connect in with different perspectives is actually how similar we really are if we just break it all apart, and if we just look at what's in our hearts, and if I look at what people shared. And so I thought that was really amazing. So thank you so much. Those who won, gift cards will be on their way to you via email. And if you didn't, please join us for another workshop, and we'll always be giving away prizes. Thank you so much for taking your time to join us. We'll ask a couple more questions. I think a couple more came in, and then we'll say good night. Thanks. Okay, Aadil, there was a question and then I sort of lost it. Somebody asked, can you share a little bit more about what the Muslim environmental movement looks like what that specifically looks like?
I think it's a growing movement for sure. So when we came in 2020, we were at that point we thought we were going to be the second group in Canada. Turns out there was another group of friends who also started an organization at the exact same time we did. We now work very closely with them. I'll put them in the chat box here as well, but they're Enviro Muslims. And so it's us two, the two of us work very closely and quite a bit in Canada. There's another group that is much quieter, but much older. They're called Khalifa.com. The United States has actually quite a few groups that work. There's a few people doing some very interesting work in terms of like sustainable clothing and things like that in the Muslim community in the United States. That's really cool to see. But I think what we have actually seen is the interest rising. We've managed to get volunteers from all over the country. When we held our conference back in 2021, we actually managed to get people from 8 different countries. And that was the first Muslim-run environmental conference in Canada, and I believe anywhere in Ontario Island. So it was really great to see. And what we're seeing more and more now is students, but not only students, also folks in the older generations coming and turning to the environment, often for the first time, and engaging with the environment through an Islamic perspective, which really does help, because we do need everyone on the same page if we are to really make a dent on the environment. And I didn't realize there are around 2 billion Muslims living on Earth, right? So we need large groups of people that share certain views to share the environmental view. All of it. And it's interesting because overseas there are actually so many groups, because I'll get messages from people in Indonesia, in Nigeria, in Uganda, reaching out to me, and I'm just like, unfortunately we don't have the capacity to be able to collaborate or assist, but it's great to know that the work is being done out there, and I think the uptick in interest is also really interesting. And also, I should say, environmentalism and sustainability especially are almost baked into Islamic teachings. That's something we found from the very get-go. And now we're at a point where I think the community and community leaders are starting to realize and speak about it a bit more. At the same time, I say this very often, is I can't blame community leaders for never bringing this to the forefront, because we do live in a post 9/11 world, where especially in North America, we've been dealing with many different priorities in terms of the safety and security of our people and our communities. And that's where a lot of the attention has turned to. But now we're starting to see other things come onto the priority list for mosques and Muslim communities. And that's great to see. Does anyone else have any questions? Maybe they'd like to unmute for or share in the chat for us before we say thank you and good night to Aadil for sharing. If anybody's working on that, I will. Looking at the wrong bit of my screen, actually. But I know. If that's it, it's amazing. Your toolkits are available on your website, am I right? They will be in about 2 or 3 weeks. But if you do want access to them, please send us an email. We will give you access to it. Website's actually going through a whole revamp. So check it out in a few weeks. It will be completely different, and you will see lots of pictures of our students in nature, which is always really exciting to see.
It's amazing. Thanks for all the work you're doing for making sure that all people have access to nature. I think that's a huge thing. And I had one question. I was thinking about nature and recreation. And I was talking to somebody who's a planner about the fact that some different groups experience nature differently. So, for example, some people go in larger groups, big family groups, multi-generational groups, and go and picnic places. And so, for example, even the simplest thing of having like lightweight picnic tables that can be moved within a space rather than things that are bolted down and break groups up, can also make other groups feel comfortable. But that's just just some of the things we can do when we plan to be more inclusive.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think it's also part of Jacqueline and Ambika's work is talking about that difference there, and how oftentimes in the Canadian concept of nature, we don't really add food in. But if you look at many parts of the world, when they're going out into nature, they want to be able to eat food and share things with their family in a safe and sustainable way for the environment as well. And I think we do have to build accessible places for that to happen.
Beautiful. Well, I'm going to say thank you to everyone for joining us and for sharing your time. Aadil, from the first time I met you and we chatted, I thought, I feel like you have an amazing message that more people needed to hear than just you and me in a Zoom room. So I'm so grateful that opportunity came to light. And yes, you can reach Aadil, his email's in the chat. And if you have any other questions, you can reach out to us as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and I wish you a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone.